My name is Valerie Carson, 23 years old, and I should have been celebrating the proudest day of my life. Instead, I was watching my father slip something into my champagne glass at my own graduation party. The crystal flute engraved with my university emblem sitting innocently on the table as he furtively emptied a small packet of white powder into it. A toast was coming. Decisions had to be made in seconds. So with the brightest smile I could manage, I did something that would change our family forever. Before I continue this story, hit that like button and drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. The choices we make when cornered reveal who we truly are, and I am about to show you mine. I grew up in what looked like the perfect family from the outside. Our house in Westchester County was practically a mansion with 6 bedrooms, a pool that seemed to stretch forever, and gardens maintained by a team of landscapers who arrived every Thursday morning like clockwork. My father, Harold Carson, built his wealth in pharmaceutical development and venture capital, always emphasizing how hard he worked to provide for us. What visitors never saw was the emotional freezer we lived in behind those perfect walls. My mother left when I was 10, unable to bear my father's controlling nature any longer. My sister Heather was only 6, too young to truly understand what was happening. All she knew was that Mommy was gone, and Daddy said it was because Mommy did not love us enough to stay. I knew differently. I had witnessed the arguments, the manipulation, the slow crushing of my mother's spirit until she felt there was no choice but to escape. After she left, the difference in how my father treated us became stark. For me, there were endless expectations, impossible standards, and constant reminders that I needed to be exceptional to be worthy of love. For Heather, there were hugs, affection, and the kind of doting attention that made me simultaneously jealous and relieved she was spared my experience. I threw myself into academics, partly to win his approval, but mostly because success in school was my ticket out. Every honor roll, every academic award, every scholarship offer became another step toward freedom. When I got accepted to Cornell on a partial scholarship, my father seemed more annoyed about having to pay the remainder than proud of my achievement. College became my sanctuary for 4 years. Away from home, I could breathe. I made real friends who valued me for who I was, not what I could achieve. I started dating Thomas, who showed me what healthy love looked like. I even started therapy, slowly unpacking the damage of growing up with a father who saw his children as extensions of himself rather than individuals. Throughout those years, my relationship with Heather deteriorated. She had become my father's perfect companion, absorbing his worldview, his judgments, his way of twisting reality. Phone calls home became exercises in restraint, as I listened to her parrot his opinions about my life choices. She was 19 now, taking classes at the local community college, while living at home fully under his influence. What my father and Heather did not know was that my grandmother, my mother's mother, had secretly set up a trust fund for me that would become accessible upon my college graduation. It was not a fortune, but enough to secure my independence. Something she had whispered to me was the most important thing a woman could have during her last visit before she passed away when I was 16. In the months leading up to my graduation, I noticed my father becoming increasingly concerned about my mental health. He would ask leading questions during our calls, seeming to fish for any sign of anxiety or depression. At first, I thought this might be genuine concern until my best friend Zoe pointed out the pattern. Zoe was the first to say it out loud. We were in my dorm room 3 weeks before graduation. I was on speakerphone with my father, who had just finished another conversation, sprinkled with comments about how college pressure can affect fragile minds. After I hung up, Zoe looked at me seriously. "Your dad is setting something up, Val. He keeps trying to create a narrative that you are unstable." I had laughed it off then, but the uneasiness lingered. Why would he do that? The pieces started coming together when I overheard him on the phone during a weekend visit home. He was in his study door, slightly ajar, talking about significant financial losses and emergency measures. When he saw me in the hallway afterward, his face had that plastic smile that never reached his eyes. "Markets have been volatile, Valerie, but nothing for you to worry about. Focus on finishing strong." When I mentioned Thomas would be at graduation but might miss the party due to a work emergency, my father seemed relieved. One less witness, I would later realize. 2 days before my graduation, I was in my childhood bedroom packing when I heard Heather and my father in his study. Their voices were low, but one phrase from my father came through clearly. "She has always been emotionally fragile, even as a child. You might need to testify to that." The graduation ceremony itself was beautiful. Thomas made it along with Zoe and her parents, who had practically adopted me during college breaks, when I could not face going home. My father attended with Heather, both dressed impeccably, both performing the role of proud family members perfectly. If you did not know to look for it, you would miss how my father's compliments all contained subtle undermining. "What an accomplishment, especially considering your struggles with test anxiety." I had never had test anxiety. "We are so proud you pushed through despite everything." Despite what exactly? Those little seeds planted for anyone listening, creating a picture of me as somehow less capable, less stable than my achievements suggested. That night, Thomas had to leave for his work emergency, apologetic, but certain he would make it to the party the next day. I kissed him goodbye, already feeling the armor I had developed at college beginning to crack as I faced a full day at home before the celebration. "Your dad gives me the creeps," he admitted as he left. "Call me if anything feels off, okay?" I should have listened to that warning more carefully. The graduation party my father threw was extravagant to the point of absurdity. Our already luxurious backyard had been transformed with white tents, professional lighting, a string quartet, and catering from a restaurant that normally had a 3-month waiting list. Approximately 100 guests milled around, many of whom I barely knew, flutes of expensive champagne in hand, all there supposedly to celebrate my achievement. Looking around, I recognized my father's business partners, old family, friends, some relatives, and a handful of my actual friends, including Zoe. Thomas had texted that he was running late but would arrive before the toast. The guest list felt curated for an audience rather than genuine celebration. From across the garden, I watched my father work the crowd. He was in his element, charming and charismatic, the successful businessman and proud father. To those who did not know him intimately, he appeared perfect. I had learned long ago that his public and private personas were entirely different creatures. What struck me as unusual was Heather's behavior. Normally at family functions, she would be with her friends or on her phone. Today she hovered near our father, occasionally shooting strange little smiles my way. She wore a pale blue dress that complemented her blonde hair, looking every bit the innocent younger sister. But something in her eyes seemed calculating in a way that made me uneasy. As I accepted congratulations from guests, I noticed Milton Friedman, my father's longtime lawyer, carrying a portfolio. He nodded to me curtly before heading toward my father. They spoke briefly, Milton showing him something in the folder before my father directed him inside the house. I made a mental note to find out what that was about. Jackson Cooper, one of my father's business partners, approached me with a glass of water in hand. He seemed uncomfortable shifting his weight from foot to foot as he offered standard congratulations. "I have always thought you were the smart one, Valerie," he said, his voice low. "Be careful with any papers you might be asked to sign today." Before I could ask what he meant, he was called away by another guest. The warning sat like a stone in my stomach. My father's current girlfriend, Diane, cornered me by the dessert table. She was closer to my age than his, as was his preference. But unlike his previous girlfriends, she seemed to possess both intelligence and a conscience. "Your father has been very stressed lately," she said, her eyes darting to make sure he was not within earshot. "There have been some financial issues with the company. Serious ones." "What kind of issues?" I asked. She shook her head. "I have probably said too much already. Just be aware." As she walked away, I noticed Dr. Patrick Nelson, my father's college friend and now a prominent psychiatrist, deep in conversation with my father near the bar. They both glanced my way, then continued talking in hushed tones. My unease grew. The servers were arranging champagne glasses on a special table for the toast. I noticed one glass was different, engraved with my university emblem and a small graduation cap. The head server placed it carefully at the front with a small reserved sign. Zoe appeared at my side, elegant in a simple black dress, her dark curls framing a face filled with concern. "Something feels off about all this, Val," she whispered. "Your dad keeps having these little side conversations, and Heather is acting weird even for Heather." "I know," I replied. "I feel like I am walking into something, but I cannot figure out what." Memories of previous family events flashed through my mind. My 18th birthday, when my father had invited my high school boyfriend only to spend the evening sharing embarrassing stories that had been mostly fabricated. My high school graduation, where he had given a speech emphasizing how worried we had all been that I would not make it. Always these subtle public undermining efforts creating an image of me that did not match reality. As the afternoon progressed, the champagne toast was announced for 6 o'clock. I checked my phone. Thomas was still an hour away, caught in traffic. I would be facing whatever this was without him. I was talking with one of my former teachers when I overheard my father talking to a family friend. "Valerie has always been so fragile emotionally," he was saying, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "The pressure of college was almost too much. We worry about her transition to the real world." The friend made sympathetic noises while I stood frozen, my back to them, listening. "That is why this celebration is so important," he continued. "A positive experience before she deals with the challenges ahead." Throughout the party, Heather shadowed our father, occasionally running errands for him, bringing him drinks, or fetching people he wanted to speak with. They seemed to be operating as a unit, and the glances they exchanged appeared laden with meaning. Whatever was happening, Heather was either complicit or being used as a pawn. As the time for the toast approached, servers began directing guests toward the main tent. The special champagne flute had been moved to a small table near the front, where I would presumably stand with my father during the toast. My sense of dread intensified with every passing minute. Dr. Nelson approached me, all smiles and congratulations, but his eyes were assessing me in a professional way that made my skin crawl. "Your father tells me you have been under considerable stress," he said casually. "Graduation can be a triggering time for many young people." "I have never felt better, actually," I replied firmly. "Graduating feels like a beginning, not an end." He nodded, a patronizing smile playing at his lips. "Of course. Still, transitions can be difficult. If you ever need someone to talk to professionally, your father has already arranged to cover any sessions." I thanked him coldly and moved away, my mind racing. Why would my father pre-arrange therapy sessions with his friend? The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture, but I still could not see the complete image. The moment for the champagne toast arrived with the ringing of a small silver bell. Conversations quieted as guests gathered under the main tent. My father stood at the front, Heather slightly behind him, both smiling widely. The servers were arranging the final glasses on trays, with my special glass prominently displayed on a small separate tray. "Ladies and gentlemen," my father began, his voice carrying easily across the crowd. "Today we celebrate an important milestone for our family. My daughter Valerie has completed her education at Cornell University." Polite applause followed, and I forced a smile, scanning the crowd for Zoe. She stood near the back, her expression concerned. "As a father, it is a unique joy to see both my daughters growing into the women they are meant to be," he continued. "Heather following her own path close to home, and Valerie, who has always forged ahead independently, sometimes too independently for her own good." There it was again, the compliment wrapped around a subtle criticism. I maintained my smile with effort. "Before we toast to Valerie's achievement and her future, I want to take a moment to thank you all for supporting our family through various challenges over the years." What challenges was he referring to? My irritation was giving way to genuine alarm. The servers began moving through the crowd, distributing champagne. I watched as the head server picked up the special tray with my emblazoned glass. My father gestured for me to join him at the front. As I made my way forward, I glanced back toward the champagne table. That is when I saw it. My father had stepped back momentarily, ostensibly to speak to one of the servers. Heather stood nearby, partially blocking the view from most guests. With quick practiced movements, I watched my father remove a small packet from his jacket pocket, tear it open, and empty white powder into the special champagne flute. The movement was smooth, almost professional in its discretion. Time seemed to slow down. I felt my heart hammering in my chest, but externally I maintained my composure, continuing to walk forward with a pleasant expression fixed on my face. Years of masking my true feelings in my father's presence served me well in that moment. The server picked up the doctored glass, now heading in my direction. In those few seconds, my mind raced through possibilities. What was in the powder? Why would he do this? What was the end game? The snippets of conversation I had overheard suddenly aligned into a chilling possibility. I reached the front, standing beside my father, who placed his arm around my shoulders in a show of paternal pride. The server approached with the special glass on the tray. I needed to make a decision fast. With a casual movement, I positioned myself slightly closer to Heather, who had stepped forward to join the family moment. As the server extended the tray toward me, I smiled, took the glass, and in one smooth motion turned to Heather. "Dad and I cannot thank you enough for all your help with this wonderful party," I said, warmly extending the glass toward her. "I think you deserve the special glass for being such an amazing sister." Confusion flickered briefly across her face, but with our father and 100 guests watching, social pressure did its work. She accepted the glass with a slightly bewildered smile. "Oh, I could not," she began, but I had already taken a regular champagne flute from another passing server. "I insist," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. Our father stood frozen, a strange expression crossing his face. Alarm, calculation, and then forced recovery as he realized he could not object without drawing attention. "To achievement and new beginnings," he said, raising his glass, his voice only slightly strained. Everyone echoed the toast. I pretended to sip my champagne, watching over the rim as Heather, always eager to please our father, drank deeply from the special glass, emptying nearly half of it in one go. For a moment, nothing happened. The toast concluded, guests applauded, and conversation resumed. My father leaned down to whisper in my ear. "Why did you do that?" His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Do what?" I replied innocently. I thought it would be nice to include Heather in the moment. Before he could respond, I moved away, circulating among guests, keeping Heather in my peripheral vision. Within 15 minutes, I noticed the change. She was speaking to one of our cousins when she suddenly put her hand to her forehead, blinking rapidly. She took an unsteady step, then another. The cousin reached out to steady her. Across the tent, my father noticed too. I saw the moment realization hit him, his face draining of color. He moved quickly toward Heather, but not before she spoke loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I feel really weird. Everything is spinning." My father reached her, putting his arm around her waist supportively, his face a mask of paternal concern. But when his eyes met mine across the room, they burned with accusation and something else, something that looked almost like fear. As Heather became increasingly disoriented, guests began to notice. Murmurs spread through the crowd. I stood my ground, watching the scenario unfold, torn between vindication and genuine concern for my sister. Whatever my father had put in that drink had been meant for me, but Heather was the one now affected. I did not know yet exactly what he had planned, but seeing his panic confirmed my suspicions. Something very wrong had been averted, even as something equally wrong was now unfolding before us. Heather's condition deteriorated rapidly. Her speech became slurred, her movements uncoordinated. I watched as my father supported her toward the house, his face set in an expression of concerned parenthood, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. Guests parted to let them through, murmuring sympathetically. "I think she has had too much to drink," someone said. "Poor thing, probably excited for her sister," said another. I followed them into the house along with Zoe, who had pushed her way through the crowd to reach me. "What just happened?" she whispered. "I will explain later," I replied. "Stay close to me." In the kitchen, my father had seated Heather on a bar stool. She was swaying dangerously, her eyes unfocused. When she saw me enter, she gave a loopy smile. "Val," she slurred, "I do not feel so good." My father turned to me, fury barely contained beneath his concern. "What did you do?" he hissed. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low but firm. "You were going to drug me, were not you." His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "I have no idea what you were talking about. I saw you put something in my champagne glass, the one I gave to Heather." For a moment he did not respond, calculating his next move. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. "It was just something to help you calm down. You have been so anxious lately. I was worried you might have an episode during your party." "An episode? I have never had an episode in my life." We were interrupted by a crash as Heather suddenly slumped sideways, knocking over a vase of flowers. Water and lilies spilled across the marble countertop as my father lunged to catch her before she fell from the stool. The commotion brought several guests into the kitchen, including, thankfully, Dr. Nelson. Whatever his involvement in my father's plans, his medical ethics apparently extended to treating an obviously unwell person. "Let me see her," he said, professional demeanor taking over. He checked Heather's pupils, pulse, and responsiveness, his expression growing concerned. "Has she taken anything? Any medication, drugs, alcohol beyond the champagne?" he asked. "No," my father said quickly. "Just the champagne. She hardly ever drinks. Maybe it hit her hard." Dr. Nelson frowned. "This does not look like an alcohol reaction." He turned to the gathering crowd. "Is anyone else feeling unwell?" The guests looked at each other, shaking heads. No one else reported symptoms. "I think we should call an ambulance, doctor," Nelson said firmly. "Her vital signs are concerning me." As someone went to make the call, my father pulled me aside, his fingers digging painfully into my arm. "This is your fault," he whispered furiously. "If anything happens to her—" "What was in that drink, Dad?" I cut him off, meeting his gaze steadily. What exactly was I supposed to drink? A muscle twitched in his jaw. "It was just a mild sedative. Completely harmless. I was trying to help you." "Help me how?" Before he could answer, Heather began to convulse slightly, drawing everyone's attention. Dr. Nelson barked orders for space and for someone to time the seizure. My father rushed to her side, genuine fear now evident on his face. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of paramedics' concerned questions and my father's increasingly panicked attempts to control the situation. I overheard Dr. Nelson speaking quietly to one of the paramedics. "Looks like some kind of benzodiazepine reaction, possibly combined with alcohol. Any idea how much she took?" In the chaos, with attention focused on Heather and the arriving ambulance, I slipped away to my father's study. Years of living in his house had taught me how to move silently where the creaky floorboards were, which door hinges needed oil. I had exactly 7 minutes while the paramedics stabilized Heather for transport. His desk was locked, but I knew where he kept the key, taped under the center drawer, a hiding place he thought was clever. Inside, I found a folder with my name on it. My hands shook as I quickly flipped through the contents. Psychiatric evaluation forms partially filled out by Dr. Nelson. Statements about my history of emotional instability, none of which were true. Legal documents for emergency conservatorship due to mental incapacity. Financial records showing massive losses in my father's company over the past year. A bank statement for my grandmother's trust fund, which he should have had no access to. And most damning of all, a draft affidavit in Heather's name describing my supposed history of emotional outbursts, paranoia, and instability. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. My father was financially desperate. My trust fund represented a significant sum of money he could not access unless I was deemed incapable of managing my own affairs. The plan had apparently been to drug me at my own graduation party, have me exhibit concerning behavior in front of dozens of witnesses, including a conveniently present psychiatrist friend, and then use that incident to support an emergency petition for conservatorship. I heard the front door open, voices in the foyer. Quickly, I used my phone to photograph key documents, then replaced everything as I had found it. As an afterthought, I grabbed a small notepad from his desk and pocketed it. When I returned to the main hall, paramedics were wheeling Heather out on a stretcher. My father stood nearby, looking both worried and furious. When he saw me, his expression darkened further. "I am going with her in the ambulance," he announced to the room at large. "Valerie, you stay here and see to our guests." I stepped forward. "Actually, I think I should come too. She is my sister." "You have done enough," he said coldly. "Stay here." Zoe appeared at my side. "I will drive you to the hospital," she whispered. "Let him go in the ambulance." I nodded, watching as my father climbed into the ambulance with Heather. As it pulled away, guests began to disperse, the party effectively over. Zoe pulled me toward her car. "What the hell happened back there?" she demanded once we were alone. I showed her the photos I had taken of the documents. As she scrolled through them, her eyes widened. "Holy shit, Val. He was going to have you declared incompetent over money." "Not just money," I said, my mind still processing everything. "Control. He was losing his company and his control over me at the same time. I do not think he could handle it." I sent the photos to Thomas with a brief explanation, then texted Milton Friedman's assistant Sophia, whom I had met several times and who had always seemed uncomfortable around my father. "Need to speak with you urgently about documents prepared for my father. Matter of safety. Can you meet at Memorial Hospital?" Her response came quickly. "We'll be there in 30. Third floor cafeteria." As Zoe drove us to the hospital, I found myself oddly calm. The constant anxiety that had been my companion for years, the questioning of my own perceptions when they conflicted with my father's version of reality, had vanished. In its place was a cold clarity. For the first time, I had irrefutable evidence of his manipulation. The fact that he had been willing to drug me confirmed every instinct I had ever suppressed. "I just cannot believe Heather was part of this," I said, finally staring out the window. Zoe glanced at me. "Are you sure she knew what was happening? That affidavit could have been prepared without her knowledge." I thought about Heather's behavior at the party, her strange smiles, her hovering near our father. But I also remembered her confusion when I handed her the glass and my father's genuine panic when she began showing symptoms. Maybe she did not know everything I conceded. Maybe she was just following his lead like she always does. Like she has been trained to do. Zoe corrected. "Your father has been conditioning both of you your whole lives. The difference is you got away to college." As we pulled into the hospital parking lot, I received a text from Thomas. "On my way. Do not sign anything. Do not be alone with your father." For the first time since seeing that powder drop into my champagne, I felt tears prick my eyes. Having someone believe me without question felt like oxygen after years of suffocation. The hospital waiting room was a study in tension. My father sat rigidly in a chair near the nurse's station, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, urgent tones. When he saw Zoe and me enter, he abruptly ended his call and stood. "I told you to stay at the house," he said, his voice controlled but seething with anger. "I wanted to be here for Heather," I replied calmly. "How is she?" "They are running tests." He looked pointedly at Zoe. "This is a family matter. Your friend should leave." "I am staying," Zoe said, firmly crossing her arms. Before my father could respond, a doctor emerged from the treatment area looking for Heather's family. We both approached her. "Miss Carson is stable now," the doctor explained. "We have administered activated charcoal and a medication to counter the effects of what appears to be a benzodiazepine, likely mixed with alcohol. Her blood work is still being processed, but initial results confirm a significant amount of sedative in her system." My father nodded gravely. "She does not usually drink. The champagne must have affected her strongly." The doctor frowned slightly. "Mr. Carson, the amount of sedative we are detecting is not consistent with a standard prescription. This was a substantial dose. Do you have any idea how your daughter might have accessed this medication?" My father's expression remained concerned but bewildered. "No, of course not." He turned to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. Unless… Valerie, did Heather mention taking anything to you? The implication was clear. He was already beginning to shift blame. No, I said firmly. The only thing Heather consumed at the party was the champagne from the special glass. The one that was originally meant for me. The doctor looked between us, sensing the undercurrent. Mr. Carson, we are required to report suspected cases of drugging. The police may want to speak with you and your family. Of course, my father said smoothly. We want to get to the bottom of this too. When can we see Heather? She is awake but groggy. One visitor at a time, please. My father immediately moved toward the treatment area, throwing a warning glance over his shoulder at me. I let him go, knowing this would give me time to meet with Milton's assistant. Zoe and I found Sophia in the cafeteria, nervously stirring a cup of coffee. She was young, maybe 25, with intelligent eyes and a perpetually worried expression that seemed to have deepened since I last saw her. Thank you for meeting me, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. She glanced around anxiously. I could lose my job for this. I know and I appreciate it. But I think you already know something is wrong. She nodded slightly. The conservatorship papers. They do not seem right. Mr. Friedman was uncomfortable with them too, but your father is a big client. I showed her the photos I had taken. Her face paled as she scrolled through them. There is more, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Your father has been moving money between accounts illegally, using company funds to cover personal losses. Mr. Friedman advised against it, but he did it anyway. I saw the transfers. Do you have proof of that? She hesitated, then nodded. I made copies. After the second time when Mr. Friedman seemed too scared to confront your father directly, I thought I might need them someday if things went bad. Things have definitely gone bad, I said grimly. My father just drugged my sister with what was meant for me, all to get control of my trust fund to cover his financial mess. Sophia opened her bag and handed me a USB drive. Everything is here. The transfers, the emails where Mr. Friedman warned him it was illegal, the backdated documents. While we were talking, a nurse approached our table. She was middle-aged with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Are you Valerie Carson? She asked quietly. I nodded, suddenly apprehensive. Your sister is asking for you. She seems quite distressed, and it might be better if you came now. Your father has stepped out to take a call. I excused myself from Sophia, promising to protect her identity, and followed the nurse. As we walked, she spoke in low tones. The blood work came back. Your sister had a very high dose of Ativan in her system, much higher than would ever be prescribed. Combined with the alcohol, it could have been very dangerous. My stomach twisted. Thank you for telling me. She gave me a significant look. I have been a nurse for 20 years. I know what intentional drugging looks like. Your sister keeps saying it was meant for you. Is that true? I met her Chaza steadily. Yes. She nodded once her mouth set in a grim line. I will make sure it is noted in her chart. The police will want to see that. Heather was in a private room, looking small and pale against the white sheets. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. Val, she whispered, I am so sorry. I moved to her bedside, taking her hand. It is okay. How are you feeling? Weird. Foggy. She blinked rapidly, struggling to focus. Dad is so angry. He says you switched the glasses on purpose. I did, I admitted. I saw him put something in my glass. The special one, with my university emblem. Confusion crossed her face, but he said, he told me it was just something to help you relax during the party. He said you had been having anxiety attacks at school. I shook my head. Heather, I have never had anxiety attacks. He lied to you. Her brow furrowed as she tried to process this through the lingering effects of the drugs. But then why would he? Her voice trailed off as a memory seemed to surface. Dad said it would just make you sleep through signing. What did he mean, Val? I squeezed her hand gently. He wanted control of my trust fund. Grandma left it to me, and it becomes accessible now that I have graduated. He was going to have me declared mentally incompetent, and he needed me to behave erratically in front of witnesses. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I did not know. I swear I did not know it was that serious. He just said you needed help managing things while you adjusted to post-college life. I believed her. Heather had always been manipulated by our father, positioned against me in ways she was too young to understand. The affidavit I had found was in her name, but I doubted she had seen the final version or understood its implications. I know, I said softly. It is not your fault. I used my phone to take a picture of her hospital bracelet and the visible portion of her chart hanging at the foot of the bed. Evidence. Our conversation was cut short by my father's return. His face darkened when he saw me sitting with Heather. I thought I made it clear this was not a good time for visitors, he said coldly. The nurse said Heather was asking for me. Well, she needs rest now. He turned to Heather with exaggerated concern. The doctor says you will be fine, sweetheart. Just a bad reaction. These things happen. The nurse who had brought me in appeared at the doorway. Actually, Mr. Carson, the doctor would like to speak with you about the blood test results. And there are 2 police officers here with some questions. My father's face remained composed, but I saw the slight tightening around his eyes, the barely perceptible straightening of his shoulders. Preparation for battle. Of course, he said smoothly. I will be right there. He turned to me. Valerie, perhaps you should go home and rest. It has been a long day for everyone. It was not a suggestion. It was a command delivered with the expectation of compliance that had defined our relationship for 23 years. But something had fundamentally changed when I saw him drop that powder into my glass. The fear that had always made me yield was gone. Actually, I think I will stay with Heather a while longer, I replied calmly. She seems to need me right now. His eyes flashed with anger, but with the nurse watching, he could only nod stiffly before following her out. As soon as he was gone, I turned back to Heather. Listen to me carefully. Dad is in serious financial trouble. He was going to use me to get access to Grandma's trust fund. I have proof. I am going to have to talk to the police, and things are going to get complicated. She gripped my hand, her eyes wide with fear. What should I do? Tell the truth. Whatever he told you, whatever you saw or heard, just tell the truth. Heavy footsteps approached the room and a hospital security guard appeared at the door. Miss Carson, your father has requested that you leave the premises. He says you are agitating your sister. Heather started to protest, but I squeezed her hand reassuringly. It is okay. I will be back. As the security guard escorted me out, I saw my father speaking with 2 police officers near the nurses' station, his posture confident, his expression appropriately concerned. He was in full control mode, shaping the narrative as he had always done. Outside the hospital, I found Zoe waiting anxiously by her car. Thomas had arrived as well, his face tight with worry. I fell into his arms, finally allowing myself a moment of vulnerability. It is worse than we thought, I told them, showing the new evidence I had gathered. We need help. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Thomas had a law school friend, Derek Williams, who specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse cases. Though I was hardly elderly, the principles of conservatorship abuse applied. We met in Derek's small office on Sunday morning, laying out everything we had gathered. First, we need to secure your trust fund, Derek said, examining the documents. If your father has already filed for emergency conservatorship, we need to counter it immediately. He was supposed to file Monday morning, according to the paperwork I explained. The party and I assume my erratic behavior after being drugged were supposed to be the triggering event. Derek nodded thoughtfully. So we have a small window. Good. Next, we need to expand our evidence base. These financial documents from Sophia are damning, but we need more. We spent hours strategizing. Derek made calls to the hospital, securing copies of Heather's medical records. With her verbal consent, which she provided during a carefully timed call when my father was meeting with his lawyer, Thomas contacted Jackson Cooper, my father's business partner, who agreed to meet with us privately. The meeting with Jackson revealed even more than we had anticipated. My father's company was not just struggling, it was essentially bankrupt, kept afloat only by creative accounting and misappropriation of investor funds. Jackson had been trying to extricate himself from the partnership for months, but my father had been blocking his efforts. Harold has always been controlling, but this past year he has become desperate, Jackson explained. When he learned about your trust fund coming due, he became fixated on it as the solution to all his problems. Heather was discharged from the hospital Sunday evening. My father immediately took her home, and according to a text, she managed to send me confiscated her phone shortly after. But the message had been clear. Dad is telling everyone you have been unstable for years and tried to blame him for what happened to me. Do not come to the house alone. By Monday morning, we were ready. Derek had filed preemptive paperwork blocking any conservatorship attempts. The police had opened an investigation into the drugging incident, with the hospital records providing clear evidence. Sophia had given a statement about the financial irregularities. Jackson had provided documentation of business improprieties. The final confrontation took place at my father's house on my terms. I arrived with Derek, Thomas, Zoe, and a police detective who had been assigned to the case. My father opened the door, his face a mask of paternal concern that quickly shifted to wariness when he saw my companions. Valerie, I have been so worried about you, he began, his voice perfectly modulated to convey loving concern. After what happened at the party, I thought you might be having another episode. I noticed his emphasis on another, continuing to build his fictional narrative even now. Behind him, I could see Heather hovering in the hallway, her face pale and uncertain. I would like to speak with you in your study, Dad, I said calmly. We have some matters to discuss. His eyes flicked over the group, calculating. Now is not really a good time. Perhaps later, when it is just family. The detective stepped forward, showing his badge. Mr. Carson, I am Detective Rodriguez. I am investigating the incident involving your daughter Heather's hospitalization. I would like to ask you some questions as well. My father's facade cracked slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his features before he recovered. Of course, he said smoothly. Please come in. We moved to his study, the room where so many of his manipulations had been planned. I could see him assessing the situation, trying to determine how much I knew, how much evidence I had. I sat in the chair across from his desk, deliberately taking the power position where guests usually sat. He remained standing, unwilling to cede the psychological advantage of height. Valerie has been under tremendous stress, he began, addressing the detective. Her behavior has become increasingly erratic. I removed my phone and set it on the desk between us. Actually, I would like to play something for everyone first. I pressed play on the recording I had made in Heather's hospital room. Her groggy voice filled the silence. Dad said it would just make you sleep through signing. What did he mean, Val? My father's face hardened as the recording continued, capturing his return and the nurse's mention of police questions about the blood test results. You recorded a private conversation, he said, his voice dangerously low. That is illegal. Actually, in this state, one-party consent is perfectly legal, Derek interjected. Valerie was part of the conversation and consented to its recording. I placed the USB drive Sophia had given me on the desk next to my phone. Then I added printouts of the documents I had photographed in his study. Financial fraud, I said quietly. Attempted conservatorship fraud. Drugging me with intent to manipulate me into signing away my legal rights. Shall I continue? This is absurd, my father sputtered, though I could see the calculation in his eyes, the mental assessment of his options narrowing. You have always been prone to dramatic interpretations, Valerie. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that concerns me. The study door opened and Heather slipped in, ignoring our father's sharp look. Stop it, Dad, she said, her voice small but determined. I know what you did. I know what you told me about Val was not true. My father's expression shifted, becoming cajoling. Heather, sweetheart, you are still recovering. You are confused about what happened. I am not confused about the affidavit you wanted me to sign, she countered. The one saying Val had all these emotional problems she never had. I found it in your desk this morning. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in my father's eyes. The carefully constructed narrative was collapsing from all sides. As the detective began formally questioning my father about the drugging incident, the door opened again. Jackson Cooper entered, followed by Diane, my father's girlfriend. Both carried folders. I hope we are not too late, Jackson said grimly. We have the financial records you requested, detective. My father stared at Diane, betrayal written across his features. You too. She met his gaze steadily. What you did crossed every line, Harold. Drugging your own daughter. I cannot be part of that. The next few hours passed in a blur of statements, documents, and increasingly desperate denials from my father. As the evidence mounted, his composure crumbled. By the time the detective informed him he was being taken in for questioning with charges likely to follow, he had resorted to threats. You will regret this, he said, looking directly at me as officers prepared to escort him out. I gave you everything. This is how you repay me. You gave me fear and manipulation, I replied quietly. I am giving myself freedom. After he was gone, Heather and I sat alone in the living room, the house eerily quiet without our father's dominating presence. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, we spoke honestly with each other. I believed him, she said, tears streaming down her face. About everything. That Mom left because she did not love us. That you were unstable and needed his guidance. That I was the good daughter for staying close to home. I know, I said, taking her hand. That is what he wanted. He needed to keep us separated so we could not compare notes, see the inconsistencies in his stories. He told me you were jealous of me, she continued. That you resented me for being his favorite. I laughed softly without humor. He told me the same thing about you. That you resented me for being smarter, for getting away to college. We both fell silent, processing the years of manipulation, the carefully constructed rivalry that had kept us from being true sisters, from being allies against his control. What happens now? She asked finally. I squeezed her hand. Now we get to decide for ourselves. Together. 3 months after my graduation party, I was settling into my new apartment in the city. It was modest compared to my father's mansion, but it was mine, paid for with a portion of my trust fund that I was learning to manage responsibly. The rest was safely invested with a small monthly stipend that allowed me to take my time finding the right job rather than the first available one. Heather had moved in temporarily while she figured out her next steps. After years of our father controlling her education and ambitions, limiting her to the local community college where he could monitor her, she was exploring her own interests for the first time. She had enrolled in a photography course and was considering transferring to a 4-year college the following semester. Our father was facing multiple charges, including financial fraud, attempted conservatorship abuse, and drugging with intent to commit fraud. His business had collapsed completely once investors learned of the misappropriation of funds. The mansion was in foreclosure. His fall from grace had been swift and complete. Both Heather and I were in therapy separately and occasionally together, processing the years of manipulation and emotional abuse. It was painful work unpacking the ways we had been pitted against each other, the false narratives we had internalized, the defensive mechanisms we had developed to survive in our father's household. I am still angry sometimes, Heather admitted one evening as we shared takeout on my small balcony. Not just at Dad, but at myself for believing him for so long. I nodded, understanding completely. It is hard not to be angry at ourselves. But we were children when it started. We did what we had to do to survive in that environment. Thomas and Zoe remained steadfast supports in our recovery. Thomas and I were taking our relationship slowly, both aware that I needed space to discover who I was outside of my father's influence. Zoe had become like a sister to Heather as well, the three of us forming a tight unit of mutual support. I had found unexpected purpose in my experience volunteering with an organization that helped young adults navigate family estrangement and financial independence. The skills I had developed surviving my father's manipulation proved valuable in helping others recognize and escape similar situations. "You know what I realized the other day?" Heather said, setting down her chopsticks. "I have never really known what I want. Every decision I made was about pleasing Dad or reacting to what he wanted. Even the things I thought I enjoyed, like tennis and business classes, were his interests that I adopted." I have felt the same way, I admitted. College helped me start figuring it out, but I still catch myself sometimes making decisions based on what would have kept me safe from his criticism rather than what I actually want. We were learning that recovery was not linear. Some days were easier than others. Some memories were harder to process. But we were moving forward together, creating a new kind of family based on honesty and mutual support rather than fear and manipulation. The trust fund that my father had been so desperate to control became a source of healing rather than division. We used a portion to pay for therapy for both of us. Heather and I agreed that once she decided on a university, her education would be covered as well. Our grandmother would have wanted that. Perhaps the most profound change was in how I viewed myself. For years, I had questioned my own perceptions when they conflicted with my father's version of reality, a common response to gaslighting and manipulation. The constant anxiety, the second-guessing, the need for external validation had been so deeply ingrained that I hardly recognized their absence at first. The freedom to trust my own judgment to make decisions without fear of retribution or manipulation was both exhilarating and terrifying. There were days when I missed the clear, if toxic, structure my father had provided, but those days became fewer as I built my own foundation. Heather experienced similar struggles, often calling me in moments of panic when facing decisions our father would previously have made for her. Together, we were learning how to be the authors of our own stories rather than characters in his. What I want you to take from my story is this: manipulation and control can look like love and protection. The people who hurt us the most are often those who claim to care the most. But your perceptions matter. Your feelings are valid. And it is never too late to reclaim your own narrative. The champagne glass that was meant to begin my entrapment became instead the catalyst for my freedom. Sometimes the most important choice we make is to trust ourselves even when everyone around us says we should not. Heather and I are still at the beginning of our journey to true independence and healthy relationship with each other. There are hard days and setbacks. There are moments when we fall back into old patterns. But we are moving forward with honesty and compassion both for each other and for ourselves. Have you ever had to make a split-second decision that changed everything? Or have you experienced family manipulation that took years to recognize? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about breaking free from toxic relationships and finding your authentic self. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, share this video with them. Sometimes knowing we are not alone in our experiences is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you deserve to be the author of your own life.